Could you please pronounce your name correctly for me?
Fritzi Huber.
And I'm always fascinated by how people become creative in the first place. And you have great history and childhood, so please give us some stories.
Usually people will ask when you decided to become an artist, especially if they've been through the proper system. The proper system being the educational process and going to colleges and universities and, making a decision what you were going to do with your life. Well, that was never part of my life. My life was being born into being creative with parents who were European circus, and we were always considered artistes. So creating was just part of growing up, and I never considered myself anything other. I was always an artist, making costumes, building riggings, there's always that going on.
Now, where was this?
This was in the United States. We traveled all over the United States and Cuba and Canada, but we mainly stayed in this hemisphere. My parents...
It's just funny when you're defining, I lived in a hemisphere. Most people say a city or a state, maybe, but
No, the hemisphere.
Okay. That's great.
So my mother was from hundreds of years of circus background, and my father was one of those kids that ran away with the circus. He was actually from Basel, Switzerland, and he was supposed to become a bookbinder's apprentice, but at 16, he ran away, and his story is pretty incredible. And then he and my mother were married, and she was considered a performer's performer, which means that you can do a little bit of everything, but you have your specialty. And that, I think, is carried over to me, because you'll see that I've changed tracks a number of times, but I always come back to that center. My focus is hand paper making. And at this point, I've been a hand paper maker for 45 years, which seems very disparate from being a circus performer, but it has everything to do with it. And there's a story that links to that, too. You want to know how it goes?
Do share.
One of the things that happens when you're on the road all the time, which we were 9 months out of the year, and then we would go home. We had a home in New York and a home in Texas, and whichever one we were closer to, that's where we would go. And we also had surrogate family in Indiana. Sometimes we would go there. But for 9 months, you're traveling. 4 people in a 28-foot trailer. So it's really intimate, and you're always looking for things like water and lights, and yet you were going to ask something.
And privacy. But,
yeah.
Well, no, you said 4 people, so a sibling?
My brother.
Okay.
My brother. We are 1 year apart.
Okay.
So he's 1 year younger than me. One of the things you're always looking for is water. Where to get it, how to dispose of it, how much can you get, is there any pressure, is it potable? All these things about water are very, very important stuff. It's one of the first things you look for when you get to a location. And so the first time that I was able to get my hands in a vat of water, not knowing that this was going to happen, it was a euphoric experience. It was a sense of wealth and enrichment and satisfaction and a feeling of safety and security. And, so I've stayed with it for 45 years. So water. And the other thing was traveling all the time, I couldn't have a library card. So when I finally would get a library card, because every now and then my parents would leave me in town with some friends to go to public school for a semester. We went to Calvert's Correspondence out of Baltimore, Maryland. And so if I was going to public school, I could have a library card, and I would check out as many books as possible. I'd sleep with them. I would just devour these books because that's another form of enrichment. And I finally got to the point where I would go to the library, walk down the aisles, close my eyes, and inhale. And the fragrance is what I would respond to because I love the smell of books. And they turned out to be older books, and a lot of older books were made with very good paper. And so between that romance with the book and the paper and the lack of water and then the fulfillment of being with water, paper making is a natural for me. Plus, I'm a water-focused person, so.
I'm not sure what the water-focused person thing.
Because of the lack of water, I've always, as an adult, arranged to live within close proximity to water.
Okay, I totally understand. I love being near water myself. I get it. I don't know that I'd call myself a water-focused person, but I enjoy water.
Well, throw the paper making with it.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I have a huge affinity for waterfalls. As a matter of
Oh,
that's
yes.
The sound and everything that comes off of
The
that.
energy of
Love
that.
Yeah, that's my little fetish. So, when did you first find paper making?
I was taking a printmaking class in California, and I was doing a lot of color brayers and color that I needed to have a very still room with not people walking around kicking up dust. So my professor gave me a key to the lab, and I would go at night. And I was trying to do this really deep embossing, and I kept breaking surface with the paper. This was the early 70s, and big paper making transition started happening in the early 70s. We were getting all our papers from Europe, basically, fine papers for art making.
As is still generally acknowledged.
Well, it is. It is.
Well,
it's
Asia and Europe, both very strong papermaking histories.
Right. But there wasn't any fine handmade papers or art papers in this country until the 70s. And so here it is, early 70s. I'm in this classroom in the middle of the night, and there was only one other woman, an older woman, who was in there working with me, and she heard my frustration. I'm like talking to myself. And she said, "What's your problem?" And I said, I can't get this deep embossing without breaking the paper. And she said, "Well, why don't you just make your own?" And I laughed, and I went, "Oh, yeah, right." She said, "No, look, there's an arc lamp in one of the other studios, and we can go in there and make a negative mold." And I was, okay. So she taught me, and it turned out that this was Cheryl Cunning. She had studied with Ishiro Abe, who was the living treasure of Japan at the time. And so she started showing me how to make my own paper. And it took me 2 years to decide that that's what I wanted. So by 1974, I was on it and said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then I went to one of my other professors and I said, here's my problem. I can't find anybody who teaches paper making as a fine art in any of the universities. I'm finding industrial paper making. And he said, "Do you want to teach?" And I said, "No." Little did I know I'd be teaching, But I said, "No, I want to get in the studio. I feel like I'm a late bloomer and I just want to work."
Now,
And
wait, what school were you at this time?
Just Palomar. It's a college, a junior college in California.
Okay.
But they have great facilities, and they had great visitors. We had Judy Chicago, and, all kinds of people came through there because of the location close to La Jolla and the university in La Jolla. So we had tons of interaction with that university. It was really, really a wonderful time to be there. Anyway, so he said, why don't you just choose some people to study with and go study with some folks? I said, okay.
An apprenticeship, basically.
Yes, and that's what I did.
All right. So now, I mean, I've seen you for the past maybe 20 years, and you, by the time I sort of found you, you already pretty well set in your processes and your ideas and things like this. So, how did you go from not knowing anything to apprenticing to finding your own techniques and your own voice through paper making? Because I mean, there's the more traditional versions of paper making where literally you make paper that's simply a substrate onto which put something else, which is very different than what I know your work, which is that you sort of incorporate the story in the process of the making of the paper itself.
I'm trying to think here what that first embossed piece was a handheld fan. And I was thinking about forgotten languages, the language of the fan. And I started making fans, and I must have made 200 of them. I mean, you can see one behind you there on the wall that's more abstracted, but I decided that I wanted to do this whole way of painting with fans, and the only way I could do the kind of painting I wanted was to use paper that had no sizing in it, no protectant. It's almost like Helen Frankenthaler using unprimed canvas to do staining. I could get the color to migrate through the substrate. And so that put me on this path to using paper. And during that 2 years of trying to decide whether I wanted to stay with it or not, I just kept going, well, don't get trapped in this one thing. Let's try this over here. Let's go back to canvas. And I just never liked canvas. This material speaks to me.
And nobody says you have to use canvas.
Yeah, but you're right. It is story-driven. I mean, everything that I do is story-driven.
Okay, quick aside, you mentioned the no sizing. Now, the no sizing on paper, does that affect the archivalness of the materials?
It is more absorbent, but I've treated it with certain things after the fact. So if I can treat it after the fact, that works. There used to be this stuff that Kodak sold readily, and I don't know, you would know better than me because you're a photographer, called cellulose acetate butyrate, CAB. It is a surface treatment. All those big murals that were so popular in the 60s and 70s, you'd walk into a restaurant and the whole wall would be a photo mural. Those were all treated with CAB, this cellulose acetate butyrate stuff. And what it is it's a very, very small plastic bead. And you break it down with acetone and you paint it on. And even though it doesn't look like plastic, it creates a plastic. You'd be more familiar with it. Maybe you've gone to an older Italian restaurant and it looks like they have bottle bottoms for a window, but it's actually cast plastic. That's CAB.
Interesting. Okay. I highly doubt Kodak still makes that.
I doubt it too.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned storytelling, and this is one of the things because I've got a few pieces of yours. I've got some little publications that you've made.
I didn't even. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
all right.
burlesque dancers, I think.
Yeah, the Pagliaccinis, Femme Fatale clowns.
Yep, I have that.
And then I made a book of pasties.
Don't have that. No, but I have the clown, the Femme Fatale clowns.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've always sort of noticed through your work is that, again, you mentioned storytelling. So that you always, you seem to have a very distinct narrative, almost even in like each individual piece. And then, of course, in a series, there's some bigger arching narrative. How important is that to you when you produce stuff?
I don't produce unless I have a story.
Okay, so story
That's
is
the inspiration.
Yeah.
That's the inspiration. And, here in the studio, I keep a sketchbook that I call the handbook, and everything in it has to do with hands. And if I get stuck, I go to the handbook, and it has collages and some writing, but it's a place to go when I get stuck, and the handbook always takes me to a story.
When we're artists and we're sitting in our studio, we're making things and we're very connected to it. We have a very subjective, I remember this experience that I'm now trying to express through this.
Exactly.
How do you find collectors, buyers, gallerists, anybody in the rest of the industry sort of outside your studio? Do they connect well with it, or do they get the stories, or do you have to really do a lot of explanation?
It's 50-50. What might be very clear to me may not be clear to someone else. I don't know. You went over to the Cameron. Did you see the exhibition over there, She Persists? Have you been over there yet?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a crib.
Uh-huh.
That crib is a story of Mary Nixon. All of us have seen abandoned houses, and I kept going by this one that was so derelict that I thought, there's no trespassing signs. I'm going in. There's a story here.
Which is the law, by the way, that I've actually been arrested a few times for trespassing, and the law is they can't actually arrest you if there is not specifically a no trespassing sign posted.
That's what I was looking for. Are there any signs? No signs. So I went in, and everything of value, what we perceive as value, there wasn't anything like that there. So what I did find were bits and pieces of paperwork and a history trail about this woman who lived there. And I decided that I was going to collect all that paperwork, being paper obsessive, and create a book with it. Well, most of the time I think and as well as I do, so many artists come across little caches like that of remnants of other people's lives, and usually take it and make it into something that reflects off of your own life. And I just wanted to do Mary's life. So in the back of the house was a headboard and a footboard to a crib. And I took those figuring, that could be the front and the back of the book, the cover and the back cover of the book. It took me 8 years to come to a point. I'm getting back to your question. I just have to go through this. To get to a point where I knew what the book was, and I knew it wasn't going to be traditional. I woke up one morning and went, it's a file. It's a file, and it needs to be paged so that people can meet Mary in the same way that I did, in this sort of random sequence, which I ordered initially, but if it gets out of sequence and it becomes more like it was. So I don't mind if people get it out of sequence. But I did this thing, and I had my brother come help me a little bit with figuring out how to engineer this crib, because I didn't have the other pieces to it, and it needed to become a file cabinet. And about the third time in, he said, do you have somebody who's ordered this? Is this a commission? Or I said, no. And he said, well, why are you doing it? And I said, because I have to. And he said, well, where is it going? I said, I have no idea. I just hope it's not my attic, and made this thing. And then someone from the university came to an exhibition we had here at Acme and saw it and went to the director of the Cameron Art Museum and said, you have to buy this thing. It's the best thing she's done. And so they came over and they purchased the piece. And so that's what I mean by sometimes it really does connect. And sometimes the buyer comes to me, and sometimes I'm a bit off. I have another piece, this little pink dresser that's in the studio here, that the top drawer of the dresser, it's called the pink room. The top drawer of the dresser has everything that I thought was exotic as a child about living in a house in one place and, growing tomatoes and having a lamp that you didn't have to worry about it falling down while you were driving. And, all these little things that we take for granted when you live in one place. So that's all in color, and it's collaged or sheen collated onto handmade paper pieces that fit that drawer. And then the second drawer is all black and white images of circus, that whole mundane thing. So it reflects...
I think you have that backwards.
Well, exactly. That's the point,
Yeah.
Is that for most people, that's backwards. So that all that mundane, there's images of women standing on their head juggling and, all these things that were every day in my life, but not in other people's. And what the piece is about is how we misunderstand each other culturally. So sometimes people get it and sometimes they don't. But, I'm living with the little pink room. Oh, and the pink room comes from the first time I visited a child outside of the circus. And we were working a show in Canada, and I was invited to someone's home for a play date. And our parents met, and it was okay. And I went to her home, and I played, and I got back, and my mother said, well, how was it? Did you have a good time? And I went, yeah, I had a good time. But Mom, she's lived in the same room for 8 years. It was just so beyond my understanding. So when I saw this little pink dresser, I just thought, that is the pink of that room and has to tell that story.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I grew up in one area. I grew up in Washington, D.C. area.
Uh-huh.
But as soon as I hit 17 years old and left home basically for college, I've lived in, I think, 20 different places since I left home. It's sort of like... I had a very stable childhood, and basically I just can't seem to find a place to settle down ever since then. and you're
so
sort of the opposite.
Reverse.
Yeah, you're sort of, well, we're reverse of each other. I don't think either of us probably are quote unquote normal.
What could you mean?
Normal is, white picket fence, 1.5 children, a dog, all that kind of, a 9-to-5 job. None of the things that either of us have.
No, we don't.
Which I'm happier for. But, so be it. Okay, one other thing because you started bringing up sculptural stuff, and then you also have your sort of two-dimensional sort of flat works. I always wonder... because a lot of artists feel like they get stuck in a thing that they're known for, their style thing. But you seem to float. I've seen you do illustrations, literally just drawn pieces.
I've also done set dressing and set painting and
props,
prop making.
Yeah, for the movies, right?
Yes.
And theater.
Yes.
Right? And then you also do sculptural works, then you do two-dimensional works. So has this been a benefit to your career, or has this been sort of a detriment to your career? So not having an iconic style?
At this point, that's the question I'm asking myself. I mean, I don't have a website, and everybody thinks I'm an absolute fool for not having a website. But I figure as long as I keep popping up on Google.
I couldn't even find your email when I got to town. just to be clear, like I ended up having to go through people of people, and it got somebody that I connected with got your phone number through them. Like you're very hard to reach.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's your loss, I guess. But
it's
or
my
you're
loss.
Incredibly mysterious, and this is a great cunning plan you have going here.
It's not really a plan, but I'll Google
Is
myself
it?
sometime. Maybe it will be. I'll Google myself sometimes and just see if anything new is popping up. And as long as I keep popping up with new stuff, because the media gives me things now and then, and as long as that keeps happening, I'm like, okay, well, I'm still on the radar. But it's hard because this thing happened a number of years ago where I was doing really, really well. And I had a lot of work out there with a number of galleries. And all of a sudden, my style changed. Not that much, but it changed. And I knew I wanted to do other kinds of works. All of a sudden, I'm getting calls back. And this is not what we're showing people. This is not the same. I felt like Eric Clapton finding another way to do Layla. How many times can you do the same thing?
You can't find another way to do Layla. There's the one way.
There's the one way. But, he keeps trying to do all the different ways to do Layla. Slow, fast, reggae, I don't know. But I kind of felt like that, and it's not who I am. And again, with my parents being considered performers, you can get off the main track. You can stay on the road, but get on the shoulders. You can always come back to the road, my road being paper, but who says it has to be a specific way for my entire life? That would make me insane.
The art world says it has to be a specific way if you want to
this is
fit
why I'm
under
down
their
to,
definition of success.
I'm down to one gallery.
Right. Well, that's why like Jeff Koons is still making big blow up, animals, because that's what he's known for.
Well, I'm bad at doing things because I'm treating them like a commodity. And I'm not saying that look at this. Wayne Thiebaud turned 100. He is still working in the studio. And for him, he feels like differences occur within the same mode of expression over time. And he keeps expressing himself in what he perceives to be new ways. And his work is always gorgeous, but he's not seeing it as redundant. Internally, it's not redundant to him. Internally, for me, it's redundant.
Yeah, visually, aesthetically,
yeah,
it can become redundant and it becomes boring. I mean, I get bored with projects. I'll be, and I always get bored and change my format before people start liking what I was doing. So like, you'll be working on a project and nobody really loves it. And then you say like, fuck it, I'm over with this. And you move on to something else. And then suddenly people love that thing that you've now put aside.
And it's hard to go back.
I can't go back.
I think, and I remember when that started happening and galleries were saying, no, this is not what we're accustomed to. And it lost a soul. I looked at the end result, and I wasn't happy with any of it.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a step back on all this. And
okay.
I'm going to be blunt. I can cut this out if you don't want this, whatever I'm about to ask, to go out. How do you make a living, period?
I'm doing several things. Yes, I'm in the studio. I have a small studio at home. I have this studio where I do the hand paper making. COVID has put an end to my teaching the small workshops.
Of course.
So the small workshops are, a big deal for me, but I still have people coming through and purchasing work. Not enough. So I work part-time at the museum, the local art museum. And I also teach classes 2 days a week at Dreams, which is an outreach program for underserved youth. I've been with them for 18 years. I believe in the project, but I also need to make some money. So those two things. That's
the big question. I mean, early on when I started this podcast, like if you listen to some of the first episodes of it, like I talk about like trying to be successful, famous in the art world, get in the annals of the art history books and all this kind of stuff. And like now to a certain extent, I'm sort of like, that's not so important to me at this moment, and it's probably not as important as I thought it was to many artists. Really what's important is that I find is that we make enough money to be able to continue our lifestyle.
Exactly.
And not be worried about money.
Yes. I agree.
So the question is, like we want to be able to afford our studio and all of our art materials and just be able to do what we want to do and not be bothered by it or stressed over it or anything like this. So I always wonder, how do people pull that off? Because I haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah, well, 2 little part-time jobs. And I limit myself because I could work more at either one. But if I work more, I'm seeing it happen to a friend of mine now who is in a new position. And she thought she was going to have time to still do her own work. And when I spoke to her, I don't know, maybe a week, 10 days ago, I said, are you getting to do any of your own work? And she just sort of laughed and went, oh, that's going to be a while. Well,
it's tough.
It is what it is. You know?
I mean, that balancing act of working enough to make enough money, but not so much that it's detracting from your, we'll call it your passion, your career, your whatever it is kind of thing.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a really hard balance to find.
Yeah.
And we often go one way or the other too far.
Well, I agreed because, at some point the money starts looking good. And before you know it, you don't have time to do the work. And the whole point of making more money was so you could keep doing your work. So I stay with 2 part-time and not take anything full-time. And that permits me. Well, it's 2 classes a week and 2 days, maybe 2.5 of the other job. So 2 classes isn't taking me that much.
No, that's not much at all. So over the course of your career, how everybody desires a nice, slow, incremental increase in sales and income and kind of stuff. But I believe that realistically, most artistic careers are more like a series of ripples kind of thing, like goes up and down and up and down and up and down over the course of a career. And so I'm wondering, how has your career gone? Because I made some mistakes in my career that I've become fully aware of through this podcast, which is things like moving is a very bad thing to do for a career. Staying in the same place is probably the most important thing to do because you need to build those collectors, build the reputation in one place. So how has your sort of career gone as far as selling, exhibiting, whatever you want to call it?
The move is a big deal. When I lived in Southern California before I came here to North Carolina, I had some...
When did you move to North Carolina?
Well, I thought it was 1987, but then I had a herniated disc and I had a artist in residence grant in Southern California, so I had to go back to be in residence for that. So that took me about 2 years, so 89 really. Even though I came in 87, I had to go back. So when I moved out here then, I had so many commissions and so much coming my way in Southern California that I actually had to turn people down. I had a great studio, had all kinds of support, but I had had enough of Southern California. I'd been there 17 years, and the changes were just breaking my heart. And my brother came here and was working in the film industry, and he said, come look at this place. He said, you're gonna love it. It's like California was when you moved out there. Well, not exactly, but it was not what I was living with out there, which was money bought anything, estuaries, cliffs, and not having enough infrastructure to support all that. And it's just difficult to watch. And okay, so I came out here and I said, if I can find people of a kindred spirit, and I did, and so I moved out here. But all of that flow stopped when I came here.
Flow.
The commissions for all the artworks and being able to come up to LA, I want to show you a property and can you make something for this? Or I want to introduce you to someone. It was different. They had a law in place at the time where 1% of every new building budget had to go to artwork. So a lot of that was happening. So it was the time too. So I don't know how much of it was the move, how much of it was the time. But I've managed here, but not like it was there. And I thought at the time that it was a linear growth. If I got this far, then it was only up from here. But I agree with you, it's not like that.
But we wish it would be like that.
Oh, yeah.
We hope it would be like that.
That there's an ebb and flow is how it's been for my life. That I can still do my work, that I can still have a studio, that I don't have to do that much aside from my work to earn that extra to keep me going. And I'm in the arts. It's not like I'm doing something else. I remember meeting Masami Teraoka at one point on the West Coast, and he was speaking to a group at the university in La Jolla, and I remember asking him what he did until his work took off. And kind of like you were saying about your work, people realize what it is after the fact. He was experiencing that, so he worked as a janitor and did this incredible work, but worked as a janitor. And so I asked him, why a janitor? He said, because I don't have to think about anything else. I can just do the work and earn the money I need to make, and I don't have to think about anything else. I can think about my work the whole time.
Sure.
So
it's like Bukowski working at the post office.
Exactly. Or Romare Bearden as a social worker. Well, that's more involved, but that's much more involved. Yeah, so I figured my choice is to work in the arts, because then I'm always being exposed to and having conversations about the arts.
Well, and that's an interesting issue that I've sort of run into with some people. Some artists do very well with jobs that are, tertiary to their art practice, because it somehow supports them and keeps them involved and all kinds of. Whereas some other artists really love having jobs that have nothing to do with their art form, so that they can do like you were just saying, which is basically not think about any work related things, and they could just walk away from the job and then just be creative, and it doesn't sort of use any of their creative energies in their job kind of thing. So you seem to fall into the you want to be surrounded by art at all times kind of camp.
I tend to be rather reclusive.
No.
Yes.
You don't tell.
You couldn't find my email.
Nope. Still don't know your email.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that the amount of time that I spend sitting here talking to you, that's the amount of time I need quiet.
I am not judging you.
No, I'm just saying this is what my personality is like. But it's a way of my putting myself into a place where I can have an art conversation. Working at the museum, I get to see what other people are doing. I get to hear responses. There's an interaction that I wouldn't get by choice if I weren't working there. And working at this outreach program for youth at risk or underserved youth, I get to see what young people are thinking. And sometimes I'm thinking in my own way and along the specific line, and I don't see what's on the other side of that line. And they'll bring that. It's like it's a little gift. It's a way of looking at life in a way that I wouldn't normally look at it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love teaching because, I love seeing other people sort of find their voices and help to assist them and guide them and all that kind of stuff. Right. But I also, because in many ways, they make me rethink things. Like they question things in ways that I didn't question before, but suddenly maybe now I might question because they brought up this topic that I'd never thought to bring up.
Exactly.
And I'm just like, okay. Yeah, you can do that. That thing I never thought you could do.
Exactly.
All right. You brought up earlier a little bit about getting grants and residencies and things like this. Now, have you done a lot of residencies, and have you received/applied for a lot of grants?
I'd say maybe I've received a half dozen grants. In California, the last grant I had there before I left that I had to go back for, that was a combination of the California Arts Council and the NEA. So that's as close to an NEA grant that I've gotten so far is that joint grant. Out here, I've gotten grants from the North Carolina Arts Council, and then for a couple of years, just recently, Keenan Foundation. There was a Keenan Foundation grant out of D.C. to work within the housing community and, do art projects with entire families. So you couldn't attend the program without an adult and a child attending together. So So, things still happen. That one came to find me. I didn't reach out for it. The California Arts Council grants, I've reached out for, and I've gotten a few of those.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm asking about that is because there's this huge movement, which of course started probably in the mid-'70s in reality, towards being able to write eloquently about your artwork. So whether that's grant applications, residency applications, or just general artist statements and all this kind of stuff, like that was not common until around mid-'70s, from what I was told by a previous guest. And now it's very important, because whether it's applying for these fundings and supports, or whether it's even utilizing social media well, like hashtags and all these other, like trying to find the right way to in writing express what you're trying to do visually. How do you feel about that? Like, do you do that? Do you do it well? Do you wish you had help?
I enjoy it. Jane Baldrige in Florida and I just applied for a grant last year. We didn't get it, but the writing of the grant was really fun. I love putting the idea down on paper and then watching what comes out of that writing experience. I worry about people not writing in cursive anymore. I know that sounds crazy, but there's a magic that happens. I print, but the experience of not hitting the keyboard, but the hand and the writing instrument, something comes out that wasn't expected. It's almost like you're looking at yourself closer. And then there's a flow of an idea that maybe you weren't aware was sleeping back there, and you wake it up in the process of writing.
Oh, sure. I mean, in many ways, I enjoy writing as just a practice, but I don't enjoy writing for other people. I love just like journaling and things like this. Like, that's great. I'm all for that, but I don't want other people to read it, because I'm sure I have horrible grammar. I probably don't spell things correctly. I don't care, but other people care. So, it's a difficult thing, because of course I live in a foreign country. So like anybody who's reading English is obsessive about like how English is structured. And I'm just like, I don't know. Stop asking me. Like, just because I'm a native speaker doesn't know I actually know how to speak or write English. I just do it and it feels right. Like, that's it. But that's my issue. So how about residencies?
No boundaries here.
Yeah.
I went to the first one, and I've gone on and off over the years. It's over 20 years now. So, those have been wonderful. I haven't done residencies anyplace else.
They seem to be becoming exponentially more important in an artist's growth of their career.
Yeah.
Like, when I was younger, 30 years ago, like, I don't remember hearing about like, oh, so-and-so went to a residency here and went to a residency. I don't remember hearing these things about prominent artists.
Right.
I remember hearing about them being in their studio 10 hours a day, all day, working. Whereas now, I feel like the residencies have become a very big stepping stone in careers that has not been normal in the past.
Well, I don't have a passport right now because COVID, they've quit issuing passports and mine ran out. So I can't wait until we travel again where I want to go. And the next grant that I'll probably write when we can travel again is to go to Japan. How can I be a paper maker and never been to Japan?
Have you ever been to the Morgan Conservatory in Cleveland?
I have not.
It's magnificent. I highly recommend it. They actually grow their own mulberry and everything.
Oh, well, you see this big piece of bark behind me?
I do.
I had a call from a friend of mine that had to cut down a mulberry tree, and he said, do you want the bark? And I stripped the whole tree. Uh-huh. Normally you have to take branches, and that's very tedious work. And so I just, I said, let's wait till the full moon. So it's full of juice, and it just came off so easy. So that's my mulberry bark. I've got a tree's worth of it.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I have a little bit of a history with paper making. I love paper making, but I just never really sort of got into it as obviously as much as you have. But I do love a good quality paper. I am absolutely a fetishist about good quality paper. Period. Not handmade, irrelevant. But good quality paper. Like, oh. All right. Back to some things you brought up before. Okay, sales. In general, your pieces are very unique. They're one of a kinds. They're basically, you know, somewhat sculptural or two-dimensional, but they're all one of a kind. You don't do work in any multiples. How do you even come up with a price for them?
Oh, that's tough because it ends up
here
being...
to ask the tough questions.
It ends up being what the market will bear. And it's so hard, especially what I run up against is that it's only paper.
Ugh.
That it makes me crazy. And if I did this on canvas, I could ask a lot more.
Oh, I get people saying, "Oh, it's only a photograph." I'm like, "Fuck you."
Exactly.
Yeah, it's decades of education, all the technology I had to buy.
How long did it take you? All my life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It took me all my life.
Absolutely.
So I'm at a point now where it's like, does that seem fair?
No.
You know, does it seem fair to me? So constantly people are asking me if I'll lower my prices. You can't lower your prices. I can't do that because it's only paper. And this doesn't work on canvas. I'm sorry. And online, it's very different. I've had other folks encourage me to do prints because it's so tactile.
Your work would not translate to
It doesn't
prints.
translate.
No.
It really doesn't.
No, I agree. It would not. Also, you often work with irregular shapes and irregular edges and like trying to transfer it into a rectangle. It would not. No, stay with your originals.
Yeah.
But
so pricing is the most difficult.
it is. I mean, everything's. I mean, because like I look at some of the people that I admire, and like I'm shocked by their prices, and I mean that in that oftentimes I'm shocked by how low they are, not how high they are, because I generally don't admire the people that have high prices, but that's a whole different issue. But the point is, like, you know, how do you come up with the price for these things? Because I mean, you're talking about, you know, years of practice, you know, unique techniques, specialized tools, and all this kind of stuff. Like, so, like, do you have some, like, I wish I could come up with like a spreadsheet on how to price something, because you can't do it by the square foot or square meter or whatever. Like it's because each material, some could be more expensive than others.
Right.
You know, your mulberry that you hand hewn is going to be a more expensive thing because you can't replace it, kind of, also, versus some, you know, denim that you've beaten up and made into a paper pulp. So, you know, like, what are some of the factors when you're thinking about trying to create your prices that you take into consideration?
The amount of time I put into it. Like, I'll do these very small pieces sometimes with just my standard size mold and decal. It's like 9 by 11 inches. I'll do something small. And it'll be the same price as something that's 3 times that size. But if it took as much work, then I'm going to charge that amount of money. It's the amount of time I put into a piece and the amount of thought I put into it and how much I want it in that person's hands. Like the piece I sold at the museum, I probably sold it for less than I would have liked to have gotten for it, but I wanted it to have that home.
Sadly, a lot of artists do that. They sort of undervalue themselves because
they
want it
donate
in a collection.
It, you know, and that happens a lot. If a museum is interested, of course they would love to have it for free if they want that piece in their permanent collection with provenance, and you know, but I just can't.
I find that to be wrong, though. Like,
it
in
feels
the long
insulting.
term, kind of, yeah. Because I mean, a museum is basically, they're going to then be the repository of this work. They will be the scholarly place where people will look for this work for, you know, centuries in the future, and they will be continuing to be open and attract people. So like they should pay for it.
It's funny. I'm going to harken back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, and that is how diverse the work is. Like, it goes to sculpture, and then it's this, and then it's that. They have 3 pieces in their collection. The first one was purchased by the previous director, Deborah Velders. The second one is the Mary Nixon history, and the newest one they have was a commission that I did for the library, and when they built the new building and took the old one down, the museum ended up getting the piece. All 3 of them are so completely different that you wouldn't know it's the same person.
Well, and that's the thing that I'm so, okay, so we'll go back to that conversation
they're
again.
recording that now, you know, because they have all 3 pieces that are so disparate that they're recording the differences between the types of work I do.
Okay, but how long a time span are you talking about between these works?
The library piece and the first piece they purchased were not that far apart.
Well, because like I'm thinking to my own work, and like if you bought something from 2000 and then you looked at something that I made last year, it's 20 years difference. Pretty big difference in a lot of my aesthetics and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But there was a time period in there for like 10 years where it was pretty consistent of a certain look and feel. But like it changes. I mean, it's natural that we change. We should. We should be growing and getting more whatever, interesting, engaging, better quality.
Right.
You know. But there's still going to be a similar aesthetic to our sort of visual voice over the course of our careers, hopefully.
Yeah.
We hope there is.
Well, all three of the pieces they have tell a story. That's the only thing that really connects them.
And paper.
Well, no. One of them, that's the thing. That's the thing.
Well, maybe that's the thing you need to think about.
I could, but you know, they've purchased the one-offs. One of them is handmade paper. The other is, you did or didn't see the show that's over there? You have or haven't?
I did.
Okay, the overhead shears.
Oh, okay. Those were yours.
That's the see?
Oh, okay.
That's the library piece.
Okay, I saw the overhead shears and I couldn't find a label for it. So I couldn't figure out who did it.
Yeah, it's the Tales of Genji.
Okay.
So, and that had a lot to do with a show that I had at the Old St. John's in 1996, and they had just acquired some Japanese prints, and there was a lot going on with the Japanese community and Japanese papers, and I decided I was going to present that as one of the options to the library for this commission. And so that's the Tales of Genji. I'm going to have to look for the label and see what they've done with it. But the third piece is so different. Deborah Vilders again invited me to make a toy, and I decided I was going to make some hero figures. And there are a number of conjoined twins from North Carolina. And when I was a child, I had friends who were cranially connected as conjoined twins, and they were black, and they were in Cuba. And I thought, if I do them as hero figures, it's going to be so misconstrued politically. Who do I go to make this understandable? How do I communicate this hero figure? And so I went to Ang and Chang.
Of course.
North Carolina gentlemen farmers, and you know, they're in their little tuxes, and they're conjoined by the stomach or the diaphragm. And so I did Ang and Chang hero figures, and they're stuffed with cracked Thai rice.
I think I've seen this.
Siam. You might have.
Yeah.
See, but that has nothing to do with the other two pieces that are there.
Well, and that's the thing. Like a lot of us do that throughout our careers. I mean, we do random one-off pieces because we're trying something, we're thinking of something, or in this case, you were commissioned to do something. And this is one of my other pet peeves about commissions. I have the whole thing about commissions. I wish that people who want commissions would sort of come up with the idea of like, you want something that's of that artist's oeuvre, so like don't ask them to do something that's not their style.
Yeah.
Because I talk to a lot of artists and they're like, I love all my artwork except for my commissions because they have nothing to do with what I do.
Well, it actually does have to do with what I do. The two books that you have, or the one book that you have, and then I mentioned the pasties, I grew up in costumes. I grew up in fabric. I make my paper out of fabric. When I do the mulberry, it's not that often, but most everything is made out of rag, so I'm very familiar with fabric. And to do that didn't seem like it was so far out of place. It was just another tool in my toolbox.
Well, okay, I should rephrase my whole thing. Like, so it's not that we do things that are random, you know, like these one-offs, but we do these things that are one-offs in the thought that it might then be the seed of another thing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of those little one-offs end up not being the seed of something. So then it looks like just like a tree, and it's like a branch that just didn't keep growing. Mm-hmm. Like it's still similar.
Well, it's
of the same
kind of
tree,
like that, yes.
but it's not. It didn't grow into something bigger and more robust. So
No.
I've got lots of that stuff. Like
Yeah.
I worked with all kinds of weird processes and materials over my career that they look like one-offs because I just didn't continue to work on them.
Well, that piece was enough. I didn't need to pursue that path anymore. I think that I continue on when I want to pursue the path further, but that was enough. It didn't need to go any further, but it was a good experience.
One thing that I'm always fascinated about with artists, because I have this issue with my own stuff, is storage. So you make works that are both two-dimensional and three-dimensional. What do you do if they're not on exhibit or sold or anything like this? Do you have a storage unit? I heard attic earlier.
Actually, I have very little in my attic. I have some flat files at home, and I have little flat files here, and I keep some up there. But I'm not nearly as overwhelmed as people who have a lot of large canvases. I see in the studio across from me how much is stored in there and up in the attic space here. And the other thing, it has to do with how much preciosity you put on a piece. I have pieces that I don't want to destroy up that I don't touch, and few of them are in here in the studio that I won't do anything to them. It is not beyond me to go, I don't really want to keep that. Let's put it back in the beater, and everything that's on it that won't come off or get beaten down, that becomes part of what I call spumoni. And spumoni
is that a technical term?
No. There is a technical term for a type of paper that's made in Japan called chiri, C-H-I-R-I. And chiri paper is, let's say I'm cleaning the mulberry, and there are knots in the mulberry, and they're dark brown, and you really don't want to make fine paper with all that stuff, so you kind of throw it aside. But there's some fibers that are good that are attached to that. So you make this paper that's been considered like a wrapping paper for shipping and stuff like that in Japan, and that's the chiri, and the chiri has all the remnants in it. And what I love about the chiri is that it comes with a different kind of history, and it's a little bit like collaborating with the surface rather than dictating to it. So it comes with a personality of its own, and then you respond to that. And I like doing that, but I can't even tell you how many works that I've done that with. A lot.
I do bonfires, and I burn things that I don't want anymore. It's very cathartic.
Like the smoke is a prayer going to heaven? Is that it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's burning it to the gods kind of thing, yes. Uh-huh. And a little catharsis is sort of fun to do. Is there anything that you want to expand on that we touched on and maybe you didn't get to say enough about?
Only that even though I am a bit older now, that I still see it as a journey that moves forward, and that just because I may not be where society expects me to be after doing this for so many decades doesn't mean that it's the end of the journey or that I should give up. I saw that happen when I was in my 30s, and I knew a lot of artists on the West Coast who didn't hit their mark by the deadline they set for themselves. Usually it was men who set their deadline by their mid-40s, which is really a lot of pressure, or 50s at the latest. And if they didn't hit that, there was a sense of, well, why am I doing this? Why do I keep doing this if I'm not getting anywhere? And it's not a matter of not getting anywhere. It's a matter of the journey itself. And that's what I truly feel. If I beat myself up because, I should have been here or there by now, and I should have been in this history book or that history book, then it's so depressing and self-defeating, and you kill the gift. If there's such a thing as sin, then I think that might be turning your back on a gift you were born with. Yes, you have to work, but there is a gift attached to that. And if you turn your back on the gift, you've committed, I feel like, a big sin against life. So no matter how big or how small it is, it's important to embrace that gift and share it if you can. Okay,
something that I thought about from what you're saying is productivity. Like, do you feel like it's one of those weird things? Like, I feel like in my youth, I was very productive, but I don't think necessarily that the quality was quite as good. Whereas now I feel like technically I'm probably less productive, but I think that the quality of the outcome has gotten richer and better.
I agree with that completely.
Okay.
I'm not so driven to do. I used to work on 5 pieces at a time because I was so compulsive about continuing, and then I'd have to pin some of them up on the wall so I wouldn't touch them until I was ready to touch them. Now, if I do 1 to 3 at a time, I'm happy. But yeah, 5 was a pretty normal number to be working on at the same time. I never worked on just one thing. And now I feel like I can be more focused without pressuring myself and actually work with 1 piece at a time.
All right. The last little bit, I'm going to tie together a couple different questions on this.
Okay.
So the business side of the arts, are you any good at it? Do you like it?
I don't think I'm very good at it.
Fair enough. I think I'm horrible at it.
I think that there's still so much for me to learn. And I've been told before by people who are in higher positions than me in the art world that I'm just not political enough. And what that comes...
I'm shocked.
And that comes down to being competitive, too. And I don't feel that competitive urge. I've never been involved in... I did race for a while. I take that back. I taught surf launching on catamarans, and I worked for Hobie Cat, and I raced. And I was one of the few women who raced. Hobie's daughter, Paula, was one of the racers, and we would see each other a lot. And I enjoyed that, but it ended up taking the fun out of racing. I mean, out of sailing. And I found myself not wanting to go to regattas, and it made me look at, are you competitive? I'm just not by nature.
Oh yeah, I'm not generally friends with many photographers because photographers are some of the most catty, competitive, just snarky people in the arts world because they all think we're going to steal their ideas and blah and steal their clients or their collectors or whatever. And I just was like, forget it. I want nothing to do with you all. Like, that's not the point. Like the point is to be supportive and to create a community and find a tribe and like all these kinds of things that we all want, not competing. Like Agreed. I'm not in competition with anybody because I do not make anything like anybody else. I may use the same techniques as other people, but that doesn't mean the outcome's the same.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are, I don't know what it is, insecurity, fear, anxiety. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it exists, but I find it very disheartening in the creative industry.
I do too. And it's one of the reasons you'll see behind you this year with COVID coming. I was supposed to have the second exhibition that it would have been the second year that I've curated this, called Fiber Outside the Box. And I have some local people in it, and then I invite people from out of town, and I always invite other paper makers because it just enriches us all to see how other people work and how other people think. And this doesn't have to be my show. And there's usually 16 to 20 people when I do it. I did one exhibition that I curated that was called If It Fits, Mail It. And artwork coming in the mail from all over. One of the gals who just recently moved away from Acme, the studios here, she actually sent a shoe in the mail, not boxed, just addressed, and it was the most fun show, and I had 200 entrants, and that was great fun, and it built a community, and the response was wonderful, and that fills you.
Well, see, that brings up sort of the next thing I was going to ask about, which is like that practice, like, because I participated in those sort of mail art projects, and those mail art projects are very niche. Like you can still do something that's sort of your style, but then you have to reformat it to a way to be able to put something through the mail. Your medium and sort of your method of doing it is very niche. Like on the one part, you work with a very niche material being paper, which not every, that's very niche in and of itself. But then beyond that, your storytelling component of it is also very much a niche thing, because a lot of people just want pretty things on the wall. Like they don't care about these, very personal, very unique stories and all this kind of stuff. So like, have you found that, like, because I have a belief that like the more niche you get, it actually ends up being very beneficial, because you really find strong supporters. But on the other hand, you have limited those quantity of supporters.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is,
am I right in that belief?
it narrows the audience.
Yeah.
But sometimes after the tsunamis hit Thailand, which I went to Thailand after the tsunami, and then I spent some time in India, and then here comes the tsunami in Japan, and I started thinking, here's the story. The story is the gyres out there in the ocean don't all contain trash. They contain remnants of beautiful collections of fabrics, like the temple fabrics from Thailand, the saris in India, the kimono collections in Japan. And I found a threadbare old Indian quilt that had all these beautiful pieces of sari in it, and I started casting these pieces that have remnants from that quilt in them, and they're just floating in the paper. And then there's some painterly qualities. I'll segue for just a moment. To paper makers, I'm considered a painter, and to painters, I'm a paper maker. So I'm straddling that fence all the time. But those pieces with the remnants of sari in them crossed over to the folks who like something decorative on their wall. It's still the story. It's not me going, oh, what would be pretty? You know, what would somebody want to match their couch? It's nothing like that. It's expressing the beauty that I feel is hidden in what we perceive to be trash.
Okay. Based on what you just said, how do you feel? This is so just a personal opinion. How do you feel when somebody buys a piece of your art and they don't give a shit about the story? They just think it's pretty.
That's their problem.
Okay. Well, and that's the thing.
mean, really, I told the story. They responded. They may not even know why it struck them deeply, but they're living with it. And maybe more will be revealed. Whether they get it or not, it's not my job. I can tell them the story, and I've had people come back to me, and when they hear the story, go, oh, it means so much more to me now. That's great, but they may never have that. It may just match that beautiful whatever on their couch. And, you know, I don't want to go there and hear that. But if I took that on, it might just freeze me up. And I don't think Miriam Shapiro gave us a great gift when she said pretty is not a dirty word.
Right. I mean, that sort of thing is like, when you make work, you impart your story into it, regardless of whether it's actually a story, but like your life story into the creation of it. And it's sort of, you know, is there a separation at the point of like commerce where it doesn't become relevant anymore, kind of thing? And for instance, a friend of mine just recently sent me a thing saying, oh, we put your piece of art in our bathroom. I hope you're not offended. And I'm like, why would I be offended? Bathroom is like the best place for art because everybody goes into it. It's the one room in the house that everybody sees it. And not only do they see it, but they spend time in it. So it's not like just a room they go through or anything like that. So like, to me, I mean, of course the work has to be appropriate for a room with humidity and all that. But if you can put a work of art in a bathroom, that's actually a rather place of honor in a home because everybody has to see it. And I like that. So like everybody sort of has a different sort of tier. Cause like, I also know artists that are like, oh my God, if you put my piece of art and I'll buy it back from you if you want to put it in your bathroom because I'm offended by that. So it's sort of interesting about like how involved we are in our works and if and when we can create that separation of what we put into our work versus what somebody else sees in it.
Yeah, well, I don't feel like it's my job to follow it into their home and what they do with it, or their office building, or their garage, or, you know, wherever. I have taken a piece back, though. I have to say, it's one of those commissions where somebody sits on you the whole time, and I really felt like my soul wasn't in it. It had all the movement and all the color and everything I wanted, but it just didn't feel like my soul was in it. Well, the guy's wife decided that she didn't like it at all, and it was living in the garage. And when I saw him the next time, he told me what happened. I said, why don't you come to my studio, get something your wife likes, and trade me that piece back? I'd rather have it not in the world than sitting in somebody's garage because it was disliked. I mean, that's the sad story, you know? But that's the only time that I've gone, no, I do care what you've done with the work.
Fair enough. Last little bit, it would be just any advice to younger creatives that are getting into the industry of like things that you
it's kind of hard advice. You're going to get no. So ask anyway. You know, maybe it'll be a yes. But expect that you're going to get no. Expect that there are going to be people who are not going to respond. Don't get disheartened because of those no's. Because that's just part of it.
My parents raised me with the there's no harm in asking because it's only a 50% chance you get a no.
That's it.
But 50% chance you get a yes.
Yeah. And if somebody asks you if you can do something and 50% of you feels like I could do that and the other 50% goes, are you nuts? Go with the 50% that says I can do that. I've done that lots of times. I was a scenic painter on Iron Man 3, and I had never done rust before, and we had to do the freighter. And I spent 6 weeks working on the rust team, and I'm really good at it now.
I should hope so after 6 weeks of it, yes. Okay, side note before we wrap up, how is working in the film and theater industry? Is that helpful to you, hurtful?
Yeah, no, I learned a lot. I met some really interesting people. I like working in 3D and at that scale. I mean, it's phenomenal to watch. If you're not in great physical health, don't take film on.
Yeah, it's very taxing.
It's very taxing. I had, the one I just mentioned, Iron Man 3, that was considered a really great schedule because it was a union film, right? So it was only a 12-hour day with 2 15-minute breaks and a half hour for lunch. And that's the glorious schedule.
I worked for IATSE myself at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and I tell you, it was the cushiest job I have ever had in my entire life. I was sitting there coiling cable. You know what I'm talking about? Like making coils out of cable for 8 hours. And I was being paid. It was a Sunday after midnight on a holiday.
You got paid.
Yeah, with a short turnaround. And so I was being paid more than like $275 an hour to do the exact same thing that I did for $10 an hour at the 930 Club. So I love IATSE.
The unions are wonderful. This is a right-to-work state, so they're always up against that. But the unions have managed to get a foothold, and you know, it makes it a reasonable life for people working in the industry. You know, you go splits night to day to night with no turnaround and 16 hours and maybe a half hour for lunch and no breaks, and you're not getting paid as much. That's what happens with no union.
Well, but I mean, the thing is it's also still the gig economy, though. It's just like, it's sort of like just like every other part of your life. You know, you teach sometimes, you're not teaching others. You're working at a museum sometimes, you're not working some others. You're selling art, you're not selling art. You get a film, you don't, and then you don't work on a film for a year. Yeah. So like it's that. I wish that there was some way in the creative industries to have more stability, because like I know of a gallery that what they do is they will actually like they'll find an artist that they love and they'll say, okay, we're just going to pay you a salary.
That happened to me in California.
Okay.
When they didn't sell work, I got a stipend.
Yeah.
I tried to introduce that here. It didn't fly.
It's a tough one. It's a tough idea, but from the artist side, it's a magnificent idea. So like, even if they sell the work for $50,000, $100,000, you get your salary, like, and you get a nice consistent salary, so you don't have to worry about money.
Yeah.
Unlike, pretty much everything else we do. That's right. And they can make as much money off of you as they wish, depending on what prices they want to charge for your art. But you, as the artist, end up with a stability, which is one of those things that almost none of us have in our lives.
But see, I didn't grow up with stability either. My parents were independent contractors. My grandmother and grandfather, they worked for Ringling, but they also were descendants of Circus Brumbach, which that was the circus that Ilya Kazan did, Man on a Tightrope. And that circus fell apart after that. But that's where the roots were. And my parents decided, because my father was first generation and not from a circus family, that they would be independent contractors, because as independent contractors, we could stay in one place for more than 3 days. You know, how's that? Go to a park in New York, like Palisades Park, or a park in Canada, and stay the whole summer. There's a concept, you know? And so we were independent contractors, but that meant every year they approached agents. Every year they didn't know what was coming next year. And so that wasn't really an insecurity. That was a lesson in having faith in your future, whether you've got something planned or not. You know, it sounds like me, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Well, I mean, because when you were just saying all that, I was just thinking, like, oftentimes the next generation either continues a trend or goes to the opposite. You know, so like a Republican parent have Democratic children, or a accountant parent have theater kids. Kind of like doing the opposite of your parents often, or exactly the same as your parents. So it sounds like like you were brought up in a lot of insecurity as far as like future incomes and future jobs, and that you have chosen to lead the same life.
And my brother and I both thought we did not do that, but I can't remember what he did. Well, he was in the film industry for 30 years. But you show up, you put up the tent, you put up the riggings, you do the show, you pack it all up, and you leave. And it was like a little magic happened. It wasn't there, then it was there, then it wasn't there. That's the film industry. And he watched me do paper making workshops all over the country, and I would just load it up. I'd go to a location, I'd teach the workshop, pack it all up, and leave again. And I looked one day and I went, we're doing exactly the same thing. We think we're different because we're not in the circus, but we're doing the same thing.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. I hope there's some interest there.